Hi, welcome to Long Lost Friends. I'm Elizabeth Eve King.
And I'm Andrea Goyan.
Today, we're delighted to be talking once again to Jason and Sunni Brock. Jason is an author, artist, editor, publisher, and filmmaker.
Sunni Brock is a writer, producer, and computer technologist.
They're both longtime ethical vegetarians and animal rights enthusiasts. Welcome again, Jason and Sunni Brock.
Hello.
Yeah. Hi.
Glad to be back.
And we're excited because you're going to share another one of your pets with us
Yes,
today.
we're going to share another critter. His name is Max, and I've had him. He was about 2 inches long when I got him, and I've had him over 20 years. This is him. He's a blue-tongued skink. You see him, and he.
we lean in like
There
we
he
could
is.
see him closer. So funny.
Let's see. Can you see him?
He's gorgeous.
He's beautiful, yeah.
He's actually a really He's really a sweet guy. I've not see. He's got his little blue tongue popped out there for a second. He There you go.
There he
You can
is.
see him a little bit. There he is.
Yeah.
And he's actually really got a good disposition. He don't you? Yes. And he has been with me, like I said, like over 20 years, and he likes to snuggle and be a
Yeah,
sweetheart. So
he was the runt of the litter. They do give
was.
live birth, and he had a paralyzed leg.
He
And
did.
Jason
Back leg
worked
here.
with him and
Yeah.
worked with him when he was a baby until he recovered.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh.
Aren't you a
Wow.
sweetheart?
Oh.
He's a good guy. He's like very smart and very sweet. He's got a great disposition, and yeah, he's one of my people.
What do you feed him?
They are omnivores, so they eat vegetables and also like mealworms and things like that. So he likes fruit a lot. So
He
an
does.
indigenous. He's in a northern blue tongue. He's a variant, and they're indigenous to Australia originally, but they were sneaked out of Australia decades and decades ago. You can't do that now; it's prohibited. But they're now captive bred, and you can buy them ethically. At most, well, at some like reptile shows, I guess, kind of specialty.
Oh.
So, but they're very long lived. They can live like 60 years. So
Wow.
yeah, he's in his.
Wow. That's
He's probably
amazing.
got to be in his late 20s now.
Yeah.
Oh, so he's middle-aged, I guess.
He's middle aged, but he doesn't look a day older than he did when he was like 10.
Yeah. And that's the guy that Jason was saying. He's so sweet and mild. You would never realize that when they mate, they turn into Klingons and throw each other around. They're very
Oh, yeah, that's
aggressive.
incredible. Yeah, but but otherwise they're very, loving and sweet and calm.
Do you have a female?
No.
No. I've had them in the past, but yeah, he's my boy. He's really cute.
Now, in our last episode, you guys talked about the organization where you've adopted a lot of pets.
Yeah, I'm gonna put him up while Sunny.
And
Yeah. And that
We're
was
gonna-
rescueme.org.
and we should put that in the links below.
Yeah, and we can
Okay,
put a link
definitely.
below for rescueme.org. That's an organization we've adopted 3 pets now through rescueme.org. They have different sections, reptiles, cats, dogs, and you can sign up for an alert in your state.
Oh.
Or neighboring states. We do, because we live in Washington, but we're close to Oregon, so we do Washington and Oregon. And you can also do donations. We've donated to them before, and you can get nice little ornaments if you want that talk about
Good.
your
And
pet.
they're nationwide?
They're nationwide, absolutely nationwide. So you go rescueme.org and go to your state, and you can see all the pets that need homes in your state that people are trying to relate to. So
Oh,
it's
that's
a really good thing. Yeah.
That's great. I think I have a few things I'd like to get.
They also do more than just reptiles. They do all kinds of pets.
Yeah, they do everything. So it's a really useful organization. And Max is real sweet. We didn't adopt Max from Rescue Me. Jason already had him when I met Jason. So he's been with us for a long time. But speaking of Max, someone who really liked Max was William F. Nolan. When he would come around, he used to go up to Max's little house and tap on the window, and they stick his tongue out to get Max to stick his tongue out at him, which was really cute. And Max would look at him up there and do that. But William F. Nolan lived with us, and he was a writer, an older gentleman. He was in his 90s when he lived with us, but we met him when he was 78, I believe. And William F. Nolan was the writer of Logan's Run, the novel. He also did a lot of screen work. For example, he worked with Dan Curtis and wrote the screenplays for several of Dan's movies, including Burnt Offerings, part of the Trilogy of Terror, along with Richard Matheson, as well as Bill wrote tons of short stories and other novels, and he was also a biographer. He wrote a very famous biography of Barney Oldfield, which is one of his most popular books still to this day. So very interesting stuff.
Who's Barney Oldfield?
And Barney Oldfield, thank you for asking. He was a race car driver, in the old days. So he was even older than Bill. He was a pioneer in race car driving.
Yeah, he had one time on the land speed record. This is like in the 30s.
Yeah.
So yeah, he was a big, like, jocular, weird dude who chomped a cigar and drove these old cars. You know, these old race cars that look like kind of like, I don't know, soapbox derby things. And but yeah, he was a hellraiser and all this kind of stuff. There's some interest in that. You know, there's been some recent interest. David Cronenberg once wrote the filmmaker who did Scanners and, you know, Videodrome and things like that. He's a race car enthusiast, and excuse me, Bill Nolan and John Tomerlin and Charles Beaumont, whom I mentioned before, they were all race car enthusiasts, and so it was easy to be a lay race car driver back in the day. You know, it was not stock car. These were specifically like Porsches and things like that. Anyway, so they were all enthusiasts who actually raced. And Bill won a race or two and that kind of thing. These are non-professionals. And then, but Oldfield, his was going to be adapted by Cronenberg in a movie, and he had written a script and all this kind of stuff based on Bill's novel called Yankee Champion. And the movie was going to be called Red Cars, and it fell through. This was like 20 years ago, I guess. But there's been recent interest in that and reviving that project. So I think that might happen again. So we'll see. And, you know, Bill has written a lot of things for television too. I do want to mention that, like she mentioned Dan Curtis. He co-wrote with Richard Matheson, based on Richard Matheson's stories, the Trilogy of Terror movie. And he then worked with Dan Curtis on Trilogy of Terror 2. Those both had Karen Black. And he worked on Melvin Purvis G-Man with John Milius, who is a writer who did Conan, you know, the adaptation of Conan. And so that was for Dan Curtis. And then Dan Curtis was the guy who created Dark Shadows. Oh. And so he was very much a bigwig when it came to movie of the weeks and things like that in the 70s and the 80s. He also did the Winds of War movie, and the follow-up. I forgot what the follow-up was that to Winds of War was, but there's a War in Remembrance. He did that as well. And so the Bill wasn't involved in those, but he did a lot of projects for Dan, and so did Richard Matheson. And Richard Matheson is the man who wrote I Am Legend and Shrinking Man and stuff like that. He was a Twilight Zone original writer. Bill only did one Twilight Zone in tandem with George Clayton Johnson, who is the same person who he co-wrote Logan's Run with. And that Twilight Zone, because Matheson, Bradbury did one Twilight Zone, you know, Matheson did several, Charles Beaumont did several. So it was in order of number of people who wrote for the Twilight Zone. Rod Serling did the most. He did like 92. And then I think Beaumont did like between 20 and 22, because a couple of them were ghostwritten for him because he was very ill. He had we'll talk about that in a second. And then Matheson, he wrote like, I want to say like 12 to 15. I can't remember right off. I don't have the numbers in front of me, so I don't want to commit. And then the next most written was, I think, 8. And that was by Earl Hamner Jr. who was not part of the group, but did work with Serling. He was friends with Serling for a long time. And Hamner is best known for the creator and writer for the Waltons and Falcon Crest. And he also wrote novels. But then George Clayton Johnson is the fifth most prolific. He wrote 4 Twilight Zones and then had the story for 4 others that were adapted by Serling, I think. All of his were, I think, if I remember right. This is just off the top of my head. But George and Bill, who were both in The Intruder together, which was based on Beaumont's novel, as we mentioned, they did a Twilight Zone that never got produced called Dream Flight. And they also did a Star Trek because George worked on Star Trek, and so did Richard Matheson, and so did Robert Bloch. And then George wrote The Man Trap, was the first Twilight Zone, Star Trek that was ever broadcast.
Yes.
And then
He's Dead Jim is the first appearance of.
He's Dead Jim, yeah. But so he and Theodore Sturgeon also was kind of in their orbit, and he was writing for Twilight, for Star Wars and stuff. Star Trek. There's too many of these. Star Trek as well. But George already had that experience writing for television with the Twilight Zone, so they tried one together. It got picked up, but it didn't get produced.
Yeah, it never got produced.
And then, so it's kind of a lost gem. And then with Star Trek, Bill and George did work together on a Star Trek treatment called The Emerald Man. I have a copy of it. And it was very short, but I don't think it got green lighted. So, you know, they did submit it to Roddenberry and all this. It didn't quite work out. But so Bill missed the boat on those 2 things only by a hair. But and he didn't work on Night Gallery, which was Serling's other big series later in the 70s. But I don't think George did, but Richard Matheson did, and I think Theodore Sturgeon did, and of course Serling was involved with that. So that's a roundabout way of explaining who these group people are.
Yeah.
You know, and Beaumont died. Go ahead.
I was going to say that aesthetic of the group, also known as the Southern California School of Writers, if you've heard that. But the group and that aesthetic, that type of Twilight Zone story, that cosmic but moral play, that really is the aesthetic that informed a lot of our work. And especially our early anthologies, we actually got a lot of those group members in those anthologies, and even printed a couple of Twilight Zone scripts. So that was kind of the core and basis of where we were going with our mindset, and that informed a lot of the other aesthetic, projects that we're doing. So with Bleeding Edge, that was our first attempt, and we had a lot of those folks, those group members, at our signing.
Great. And we will put the links to these anthologies below. They're really beautiful. I mean, they're really works of art, not just writing. They have, visuals in them and stuff, and they're just gorgeous. Maybe I can find a visual here and hold it up if I can.
Yeah. You have the Dark Fantastic, which was our last one that we did, and that was based on Magic's.
Yeah.
I mean, just look at the kind of illustrations they have in here. And this isn't the only illustration. It just happens to be the one I turn to. It's just, it's all over, and they're beautiful.
Yeah, that anthology is magic realism, dark magic realism. And the idea, building upon that Twilight Zone aesthetic, dark magical realism is another step into that. So if you think of magical realism of the South American writers, and then bring that element into the dark or the weird, that's what that anthology is going for.
Yeah, because I kind of think that Bradbury is a magic realist.
Yeah,
if you think about Marquez, Gabriel Marquez and people like that, and Borges, and it's mainly a South American tradition, although there are, other traditions from it, in other parts of the world, like Gogol, and the nose and stuff like that. And so there is an aesthetic around the world, and a lot of Twilight Zone sort of falls in that realm, but Bradbury, a lot of his work definitely does. And I prefer that kind of aesthetic myself. I had a friend recently who was very into magical realism named Bruce Taylor, who just passed away, and he wrote a lot of that and combined it with science fiction. And he was a very good writer, and a person that we work with quite a bit also seems to fall in that, and that's a guy named John Shirley, who is a big, what you would call, kind of has a cyberpunk ethos,
Yeah.
that's shared with Bruce Sterling and William Gibson and people like that. And John wrote a draft or a version or is co-written. Maybe he's the writer listed. I can't remember exactly, but on the original version of The Crow, based on the comic book. And so he's written other things for television, and he's a very good writer. And so he's in a couple of my anthologies. I think he's in that one. I can't remember. There's so many writers. There's 50 writers in that book. But I just am just as related to this. I'm finishing up a book that's about to come out, I think this year. It's supposed to be from Hippocampus Press, called Future Weird, and it is about kind of a future realist kind of a future magical realist thing, but it's weird fiction that is non-H.P. Lovecraft weird fiction. So aside from his aesthetic and his mythos and all that stuff, so non-Lovecraftian weird fiction, okay? And nobody really associated with Lovecraft that I want, like Ambrose, not Bierce, but like oh God, the Willows. Anyway, names escape me at the moment, but I didn't want anybody that was normally associated with weird fiction to be thought of when you're thinking about future weird. And then the future part is SF. So I wanted science fictional weird stories. And Bruce Taylor's in that, and Sunni's in that, and Bill Nolan has a story in there.
Yeah,
It's one of his last stories. I have a few unpublished Bill Nolan stories, and we do have an unpublished autobiography of his, and an unpublished novel of his. And I was working on a new collection of his, which he knew about before he passed away. So there's things that are going to be coming out from him, in addition to probably very soon a lot of Logan Drone related things.
And can you describe weird, what you think is weird? Because I mean, what I think is weird is different than clearly what.
Yeah, the future
ahead.
weird, the cornerstone story in Future Weird is a reprint of Harlan Ellison's I Have No Mouth But I Must Scream. So that kind of sets a bit of the tone. There are some other stories, Jason, if you want to go into what those are, but weird is, it's a good question. Well, Jason, what's your answer on that?
No one can define it. So
Exactly.
Thank you. Okay.
So basically, weird means odd in the old context, queer, strange. But that's one thing. What Lovecraft meant was basically, Douglas E. Winter, I believe, is the one who pointed out that horror as an aesthetic is not simply a genre or a type of story, but it's also an emotion. And I think that weird is a lot like that. It's not just an aesthetic or a genre, although it's those things. It's also an emotional component, which would probably best be described as foreboding and dread, as well as maybe an element of disgust or awe.
I think awe as well. Yeah.
There's another term, a friend of mine named Matt Carden, who is I don't want to mischaracterize it. He's a theologian, he's a writer, he's a scholar, but he uses the term numinous a lot to describe that. So it's kind of a numinousness, and dread, disgust, but also an attraction, a repulsion phenomenon, right? You're attracted to it even as you're horrified by it. So it's not that it's so bad that it makes you feel fear necessarily, but it is, or genuine horror, but it's kind of like you're drawn to it, but you're also almost hypnotized to be repelled from it as well. Did that help at all?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it is hard to define, but yeah, there are a lot of
that's what it means in the literary context, I should say.
Right. Yeah. And then you just kind of, and then it's the aesthetic of the editor reading it to determine whether or not it's their determined weird. You know what I mean?
Magical realism sort of is a similar hard to define thing. You can definitely see it. It's like
that feels easier to make, but
it's I forgot, anyway, Potter Stewart, I think, the judge, who said, I can't define pornography. I'm paraphrasing, but I know it when I see it.
Right.
Right. So obscenity.
Never
You
mind.
talk about obscenity. I can't
Yeah.
say, you know, what is obscene, but I know it when I see it.
Yeah,
Right.
magical
So-
realism tends to have a dreamlike quality where things
Yeah.
change, you know, without you realizing that they've changed. And that aesthetic, I think we bring through as well in a lot of the stories.
Well, I would say magical
fantastic.
realism.
Yeah.
Magical realism in and of itself, in the South American way of thinking about it, I feel is kind of like true reggae in that it has a political subtext. Okay.
Uh-huh.
And reggae also has that kind of subtextual political aspect. If it's not just being used as a type of beat, you know, and
Yeah.
I'm saying it has a reggae ska beat, you know, but reggae itself is always about rebellion and politicking, you know, and about how the people struggle. There's an
Yep.
element of that in South American,
Right.
you know, magical
It's-
realism too. And even in
it's the same-
Serling, his application of it, there's a lot of political.
There is. And then the same thing can be said for punk music, and then again, cyberpunk fiction, right? A lot of cyberpunk fiction is about, you know, societal woes or what's going to happen when technology takes over. How is this dystopia developing the human element and going awry, that type of thing.
And we have a digest called Nameless,
Hmm.
and it's been up and down a lot, but it's
Not namelessdigest.com.
namelessdigest.com. But it is very difficult to keep that going because I have a high quality threshold I like to meet,
Yeah.
but also just finding a reasonable means to get a print magazine out, you know, and then certifying. Yeah, except it's one word. So Nameless Digest is one word, namelessdigest.com. But trying to get that quality versus, you know, print element to bear has been very difficult. But it's a good magazine, and I work with a lot of S.T. Joshi, who is a world authority on weird fiction, and H.P. Lovecraft, and all these kinds of things. He's a managing editor of it, and I publish it. And then we have a lot of people that have been in it. You've been in it,
I've
Evie.
been in it.
And there's been a lot of other people. Bill Nolan's been in it. I've had a lot of newer writers in it. I am working on issue number 5. I know everybody thinks I'm never going to get it done, but I am. I'm planning to get 5 and 6 out this year because I want to take it to an annual. And
So are you taking submissions? Should we
not
ask?
yet. We will be taking submissions beginning next year, though.
Yeah.
So I have so many commitments already. I got to get it done. But the next issue is going to be kind of focused on weird fiction, really.
Mhm.
You know, and it's got Daryl Schweitzer and other writers that would be known in the field, you know,
Yeah.
that have contributed to it. Matt Carden's been in.
And
Yeah.
you're talking about
It's
another
also a
name.
website. It's also a website that we use to promote the magazine, but also tie special features to it.
Yeah, we've got there's a lot of content on the website as well that is not in the print version. So there's a lot of reviews, a lot of articles, and we cover a lot of things. It's not just fiction. We talk about movies and music. I've got a series of music articles up there now. So there's a lot of good content.
Yeah, I love how you have, I mean, you're artists, writers, producer. It's sort of like, is there an art form you don't do? I don't know.
No, I'm a musician too, so I've written the music for some of our things, and or designed the sound. And you know, I used to have a band for several years, and so I would like to get those albums out because I recorded that. We have like 80 songs, and there were some were improvs, and a lot of them were things I wrote. And so I want to get those mastered and out. And I still write music a lot, and I dream music a lot. So you know, I want to get that out there, and we've been rebuilding our studio, so to speak. So
Yeah.
it's been so that's something I want to keep doing. And then of course I'm writing a lot. I write a lot of nonfiction, you know, and I've had some recent appearances with you know, in this book called The Many Lives of Scary Clowns that had recently came out from McFarland, and I think I'm in one that's coming out about the Purge series of books. So I write a lot of scholarly nonfiction, and I've written a lot for Weird Fiction Review, which is put out by Centipede Press, and that I've got a lot of the things that he wants, that publisher wants. And I work with ST Joshi, as I mentioned before, for I'm writing an article about the Twilight Zone right now, which I think I'm going to turn into a book at some point.
Yeah.
But it's so there's a lot to keep us busy. And then I write novels too, and Sunni is working on a lot of fiction and things like that too. And she writes nonfiction as well on the website.
Yeah.
And my novels are, I have a trilogy of novels that I'm working on right now, and a weird novel called The Kellen Diaries. But the trilogy is called Unsub, and it's basically a police procedural that has a supernatural element to it. So, and it involves a serial murderer, and what we would call profilers. They weren't actually called profilers, but we'll just call them that for the time being. But they're not actually called profilers. I'm trying to make it realistic, so if it's realistic, then it's what George Clinton Johnson said, you only need a touch of strange. A lot of times things now, everything's fucking really strange, but and so everything is strange. The guy, his hand is weird as he's peeing, and it's like in a weird universe with weird cars and a weird house. It's like everything is too much because they can just CGI everything. And so all you need is, like George said, a touch of strange. You need the normal concrete confines of what we all live and experience, and just have a touch of strange.
Because he said
pandemic was a lot, but the pandemic was a touch of strange. Nothing else really changed the society, but this invisible thing happened. And we're all reacting to this invisible thing. And if somebody from the outside was looking at, why are they acting all weird? Where are these things? They didn't understand what a pandemic was or how that related to human interaction. They're just observing it with no sound. They wouldn't understand why people are going crazy and all this kind of stuff. And so to me, that's always very interesting. What you can take away from something to make it bigger is also as important as what you add to it to make it bigger. And I think that's what George was getting at. You don't need a whole lot.
Yeah, I think he also said if everything is possible, then nothing is interesting.
Yeah, if anything is possible, then nothing is interesting.
Because if you start changing everything, then what am I focusing on? What's to be learned? If you have one thing changing, one thing introduced, how does that impact everything? That's where the interesting story comes.
I think it's more disturbing. If everything's normal, there's this one thing that you like.
Right. Exactly. If everything's weird, nothing's weird, kind of.
Exactly.
And also, you want to have rules, even if you have a really weird. Everything has to have rules. But it's much more interesting and much more relatable. It's just this normal world, and suddenly, whatever, you're turned into a mosquito.
Yeah.
Well, that's like Kafka, but the relatable part has to be, and the rule set has to be immediately evident, I would say, because if you can't grok the rule set just intuitively so that you understand this is weird, then that sets you up for, an unsuccessful, situation where people aren't going to understand what's happening. So the rule set has to be immediately apparent. Like if you look at slasher films, the category, like Scream, the movie franchise kind of exploited the unwritten rule set in the slasher films, right? If you do this, this happens. If you do that, that happens. It looks like if you have sex, unbidden, then you would be killed, blah, blah, blah. And there's a lot of theorizing about it's a reaction to conservatism, et cetera, blah, 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 from the 80s. But getting away from all that analysis, it's readily apparent that if you watch several of these films, they are formulaic in a sense, but you can easily identify the formula. And it's not so formulaic that it's boring. It's just you're waiting on them to violate the rule set, and then you can kind of say, they're going to be messed up. And so once you have that implicit rule set, you can easily, you can upend it, right? And you can start to deconstruct the rule set. And that's kind of what Scream is doing, is deconstructing the rule set while adhering to the rule set. So it's kind of meta.
Yeah. And it allows you to follow the
dramatic Cabin in the Woods does that also. Sorry, The Cabin in the Woods, that movie.
Yeah, it allows you to follow the dramatic structure, right? Because you establish the rule set, you start to feel comfortable, you have some sort of conflict, but then eventually you get to the nadir of the drama where chaos and you've upended the rule set, and then you have to resolve that in the end. So it's something that, you know, inherently you need to understand if you're a good writer.
If anyone's ever seen the original Evil Dead that Sam Raimi directed, on a shoestring, at the end, you know, I mean, you think Ash dies, you know, because the way the movie ended. And so, but he's the hero, ostensibly, too, you know, so he makes it all the way through. He's the final boy, you know, as opposed to the final girl. And so he makes it, and then in the end, it looks like he's wiped out. Well, he wasn't, because they went on to do a couple of other films in that series, and that's fine. But that was kind of an upending of the rule set, too. He was not a girl surviving, he was a boy surviving, you know, and then he's killed, you know, so it kind of knocked the way. That was the point of why they set up those, you know, kind of interrupts, I would call them, you know, because we were already working on the trope of the forbidden book and the cabin in the woods, and, you know, things that I mean, do people really even go into the cabins in the woods? The Airbnb in the woods, is that what it's going to be now?
Airbnb. Well, why do they always go down when there's some horrible monster? Why do you always go into an unlit basement? I mean, I would never do that.
Why is it always dark? Why is it always nighttime? They always need flashlights and everything.
And it always goes, the flashlight goes out, yeah. But I'm always like, don't go in there.
Well, that's why, because it's for the audience. You know, and why do they always hold the flashlight like this now? We never
That's a new thing.
We never did that when we were growing up. We held it like.
Isn't that how they make cops do it usually? Like
That's how
like,
they make cops do it, but that's not how people normally hold a flashlight. And in every show you see, everyone's doing this now. You can always tell a modern movie, even if they're trying to be like set in the 80s or whatever, because they'll have that little tell.
Yeah, you know? It's like I don't know why that is, but I'm assuming it's something like stop, drop, and roll, like we were taught, you know, for putting fires out. So maybe this younger generations, they're taught to hold their flashlight like this. Who knows? I don't know.
So uncomfortable. And if you put your arm down, it's pointing backwards.
Yeah, it'd be interesting.
Oh my God! Yeah, it's pointing away from you. You're lighting up everything for everybody else. But that's just a quibble. But I think that a lot of these trends that are happening in films and books and stuff like that are very questionable. So I mean, that's a nitpick compared to
what other trends are you seeing? Because you brought that up. So what other trends are you seeing?
Well, in
good question.
Well, in literary fiction, I mean, not literary fiction, but in fiction terms, there's a lot of how would I call it? Political posturing. You know, you have these stereotypical sort of characters sometimes. The most recent thing I've noticed, like especially in terms of weird fiction, you know, and horror in general, is a real nothing ever happens. It's all like a mood piece. You know, there's no plot. It's like character sketch, moody atmospherics, and then the story kind of dribbles out. And maybe there might be like some kind of terrible reveal, but there's really no build in suspense because there's no plot. You know, and the characters don't necessarily don't have a transformation. Okay, and that's kind of what the stories are. All stories are about a character, first of all. And so if the character is embedded in an environment, second of all, and then you have to give the character, you know, something to overcome. What was it Bill used to like to say? All stories are about a man wants something.
Yeah, he said every story was a quest. Basically.
It could be a woman or whatever, you know. It could be a woman wants something, or the character. He was just saying a man wants something. He's like to encapsulate it down, and I would say that's pretty on point. And you know, so what is it they want, and how are they going to be transformed by getting it? Is it good that they got it, or bad, or what is it? You know, are they a bad person getting a bad thing, or a bad person getting a good thing, and then they, you know, how are they changed? So a lot of that is happening in literary terms. You know, it's just kind of meh. It's okay. You know, maybe the writing is decent, but I mean, a lot of the writing is frankly overdone. You know,
I wonder if some of that is because of the there's so much now happening with flash fiction and microfiction and a lot of smaller things, and a lot of that tends to be, many of those pieces tend to be a little more like that.
That could be part of it. I think also it's people who they're fragmented, you know, in their attention spans, and which is another thing driving like the narrative terms of what I would call in movies. You know, there's always these big, huge, showy, epic sort of things, like the Lord of the Rings or the superhero movies, right? And that's been done and done and done, you know. And then there are things like Stranger Things, which is very dependent on understanding an 80s aesthetic, okay? And I like Stranger Things, but it does kind of fall into that super epic thing. But at least it's not a fantasy thing like Lord of the Rings necessarily, even though D&D is a component. But it's also, you can understand it without understanding all the rules of D&D, for example. And because you get that this was a thing they did, you know, roll top tabletop games, which, you know, they still do, but it was really prevalent then. And I think that, I don't know, films in general have, what was it I said on a post recently? They only have 4 modes now, and that is they have a remake, they have a sequel, they have the superhero movie, and porn. And that's basically what gets made. So I said, well, they should do a remake of a sequel of a superhero film that is porn. And then, you know, they would have like, what was it I said? Money in the Bank, Money Shot on Face. And so, I mean, it's like, it's getting to that kind of encapsulation of it. Just, it's almost like a shorthand, you know.
Yeah.
Of
Wonder
what
Woman
things
does
are.
Dallas.
I think,
Yeah.
I think the
Superman
real
does Dallas.
interesting.
The remake of
Oh my
Superman
gosh.
does Dallas Part 2. You know, it's like, that's kind of where
Yeah.
we're getting. It's like, well, what is going on? Why is
No,
there
but
no-
I think what we're seeing, the really interesting work is being done in what I would call the new mini series format,
That's
which
what
is
I
the
was gonna
streaming
say.
thing.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I mean, I think the most
Fantastic.
interesting things we've watched in the past couple of years, Paper Girls. I don't remember
That
what
was good.
that was really good. Station 11, that blew
it.
my mind.
Yeah,
I mean,
Great.
that is
Station 11 is actually based on a novel too.
yeah,
I know it.
that-
I
Paper
love
Girls,
that.
I think, is based on a. I think Paper
Mhm.
Girls is based on a comic. I think.
mhm.
If I remember right. I
And I just, we just watched,
it's kind of similar to Stranger Things a little bit.
we just watched, it's Reservation Dogs,
Okay.
which
Yeah.
I highly
Uh-huh.
recommend. It's not, I mean, it's just, it's again,
Not
it's
a
a,
mo- that's
it's
a movie,
small,
right?
unique, huh?
That's a movie, right?
No, that's Reservoir Dogs. Reservation Dogs is a
Uh-huh.
series.
Mhm.
Okay, good, because I
And
was
it's-
like, I don't want to watch that. I
No,
couldn't
no,
get.
no, and it's
the
very,
ear
and
cutting
again, it's just so nice to see a smaller kind of
station dog.
story, you know, a more specific, I don't know,
Mhm.
just small and really, really well done.
Well,
we-
as long as you guys are mentioning, I'm going to mention my 2 favorites then,
Uh-huh.
which is Extraordinary Attorney Woo. It's Korean. It's not
Uh-huh.
fantasy, but it's just lovely. It's just a lovely, lovely piece of and kind of unique because it's about this Korean attorney who's got autism, and so
That's
for-
interesting.
yeah, and it's just really, really lovely. And also, I love Peaky Blinders. So probably everybody.
Peaky
Blinders
Very
is good.
different
Good.
though. Very,
Very different, but they use
Good.
music so beautifully in that.
I know they do. I mean,
Wow.
that's so amazing. That's what takes it to a different level is the
Uh-huh.
way they use
That
music with.
Nick Cave,
Yeah.
opening is really good. Cillian Murphy as an actor is quite good, and who is he playing? We
Also,
just
he's
saw a
so
trailer
hot.
that he's playing who is he playing, Jason?
Cillian Murphy.
Cillian Murphy in that trailer we just saw.
I can't remember, honestly.
We'll have to look that up.
Yeah,
Very, very
amazing.
interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Wow.
Yeah, he's a good actor. He's in 28 Days
solid.
Later and
Mhm.
stuff like that too. And he was Sunshine when that movie he was in. Was that the name of it? Where they're going toward the sun in that spaceship to save Earth.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and he was good in that. Although it's a dumb movie. You know, the movie's ridiculous and implausible, but there's a lot of cool stuff in it. It was directed by Danny Boyle, you know, who did the Sex Pistols documentary recently.
Yeah.
Who did Train Spotting and stuff like that. And
There was a little bit of a Mars is Heaven kind of a feel to it,
mhm.
which is a Bradbury story, Mars is Heaven. So
yeah, and I was thinking about, you know, those current trends, which is what we're talking about. You know, like we're just now. You mentioned Nick Cave. He did the music for the Dahmer series that's out now.
mhm.
I'm watching some of that last night, And that's interesting. It's because they can stretch it out. This kind of brings me roundabout to what I was talking about Logan's Run. You know, the rights to Logan's Run, the way Bill and George did it is they sold the film adaptation rights. They did not auction the film adaptation rights. So they sold the rights outright. So that means the studio owned the rights to adapt the book. Okay. Now they still had the rights to do sequels if they so desired. Author, you know, produce sequels. And so George wound up not writing a sequel, except he did write a treatment called Jessica's Run. But it was unpublished and it was never produced or anything. I can't remember. I've read little bits of it and I've seen, but it's not a full novel or anything. It's more like a treatment. Then Bill wrote Logan's Search, Logan's World, Logan's Return, which is a novella, and some short stories in the Logan universe. And actually, Logan's Run, the whole idea is actually Bill's. Okay, because to go back to Charles Beaumont, I want to explain one quick thing about Beaumont. I mentioned he was kind of a tragic figure. That's why we did the documentary about him. He died in 1967 at age 38. And he died of frontotemporal dementia, is what I think he had. And that's a form of Pick's disease. Okay, and so he was deteriorating by the time he was on the set of The Intruder, acting as the school headmaster. He was deteriorating. Bill could see that because he had known him for a decade by then. And so Beaumont gradually died over a period of 4 years where his mind just disintegrated and he was, all kinds of terrible things happened in the family. Was devastated. His wife would die shortly after that of cancer. And his children were left, you know, to fend for themselves. There was 4 children. And their oldest brother, instead of letting the family get broken up, and much to his credit, his name is Christopher Beaumont. He was an actor and a writer. He's still around. The children, he kept them all together, even though he was only like 21, I think, at the time when his mom passed away.
That's right.
And he did a lot for them. And, you know, I give him every credit in the world for being able to do that, because that's a lot to take on, you know, as very young siblings, you know, and navigating the world when he didn't really have much left. And so, but Beaumont, when he was working with Bill, you know, said Beaumont was teaching a UCL extension class, and said, I need you to come in and teach one of these classes for me, and I'd like you to do what is the difference between social fiction and science fiction. So Bill came up with the idea of, well, social fiction is life begins at 40. Science fiction is life ends at 40. You know, so he kind of came up with that thing, and he got a little premise going, and then he lowered the age to 21. He says that's when your life's really getting going, and then it's over. And so that's what happens in the book. Is they raised it to 30 in the movie, but in the book, because they were playing on that "don't trust anybody over 30" thing that was happening when the movie was current in 1976. But they were 21 in the book, so Bill came up with this idea, presented it to George, and they took notes for like a year on cards, index cards. Came back, got together, banged out the script in 21 days. I mean, the book in 21 days. George wanted to do a script at first, Bill, because he was used to working with that, and Bill was used to working with pros and had not done a script. And so Bill said, no, we write the novel first, because it was Bill's first novel. He said, we do the novel first, then we adapt it, and we sell both of them for more money. And so that was their idea. So they wrote it together, spelling each other. Then Bill took it and polished it, and that's what got published. So the characters were mainly Bill's, and George did do a lot of writing and adjuncting and ideas, and so that's how they wound up doing what they did on each one. And so Bill kind of kept going with the idea, which was his to begin with, and just adding to it, which is how the sequels came. And they had an agreement where Bill and George said, hey, we can each do whatever we want, a gentleman's agreement with, you know, the characters. So if you want to do a book, Bill, do it. If you want to do one, George, do it. And so they would just have that. But they split 50-50 on their first novel. They keep all the proceeds from the other, whatever else they came up with on their own. That's kind of what their agreement was. And so now what I'm getting to here is they sold the rights. They didn't sell it for the author-written sequels. So those are all different deals. They didn't sell it for certain other things that wound up happening, like they wound up doing a series, okay, briefly in the 70s. So that is now expired, and they could do a series theoretically based on the novel, but the novel is held up because the rights are owned by the studio, so no one can make a movie of it, except there's a 50-year delimitation period, and then they can petition to get the copyrights back, and that is next year. That is upon us. And so Bill knew all about this, and so we have now petitioned to get those rights back. So if we get those rights back, I would like to see something happen with it.
Yeah.
To make another movie?
Or,
I'd like to
or
see
one
it
of
on
these
streaming.
miniseries, or, you know, a streaming thing would be, I think, better.
There's
at
enough
this
stuff
point.
with Bill's
Yeah.
books. There's a ton of stuff with Bill's other books.
Yeah.
And I discovered that Bill had co-written 3 treatments. After he passed away, we are the heirs and owners of his estate. And so he didn't have any other living relatives except his very estranged wife, and he didn't want her to be part of any of it. So she's not involved. And so that's all been settled now. He passed away in July of 2021. And so that's all been settled now. And so I discovered 3 unproduced or unpublished treatments that he co-wrote with Alan Dean Foster, who is a science fiction writer and a film adaptation novelization writer in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
He did a lot of that, like The Thing and Alien and stuff like that.
They're all in the Logan's universe.
And they're all in the Logan's Run universe. They're
Yeah,
all
they're
Logan's
cool.
Run related. So I want to finish those. I've already been in touch with Alan Dean Foster. I want to finish those and put those out. And I was already working on a Logan's Run novel with Bill called Logan Falls that he wanted me to take over. And that's going to be kind of a deconstruction of the whole thing. So there's a lot of Logan material out there that's going to be happening.
Wow. So it sounds like you have what, a bunch of anthologies, also
Yeah.
novels and film and music stuff sort of coming out?
Yeah, I designed that book, The Dark Fantastic. And yeah, so I'm a designer. I mean, I'm a graphic designer and an artist. And so I did some of the images, and I used to do a lot of painting and stuff like that, but I just do a lot of design work, and I publish people and help with the designs of their books and things like that. So there's a lot we do, collectively. And Sunni assists me in these various things, and she's my editor on the films, for example, and she helps me with some of the publication stuff, getting it ready, and eyeballing my design work. And she's my alpha reader and all that sort of thing. So there's a lot we do.
Elizabeth, do you feel a bit like a slacker right now?
I feel like a slacker. The past 2 years of the pandemic has been so kind of fraught. We were dealing with Bill. He was older. He's in his 90s by the time he lived with us, and so kind of having to keep him together. Then he passes away. We had to deal with his estate. We had the pandemic. There was Sunni's mother had passed away, like right at the very beginning of 2020. She was sick through the last part of 2019. There was a lot of stress, and in fact, I had some of that was related to I had a very bad situation happen with me prior to that happening. That was stress induced, I think, which is I got shingles of the eye, this eye.
Yeah.
And so it was all over my face. And so that took like a year to kind of heal from, really. And I still have eye drops and medication I have to take for it. But, it's so that's going to be something. It's scarred my cornea, so I can't see as well out of this eye anymore. Yes. So, that was something to get used to. And
so get your shingles shots.
I was too young to get the Shingrix shot. So if you're 50, you can get it. I was not 50 when I had it.
Do they give it to you after? Can you get it after you've had it?
I had to get it, but I could not be in an active phase of shingles. So that took a long time because my shingles kept recurring, probably because of all the stress that was happening. And so it was just enough to keep my eye from going totally blind, because you can go totally blind from that. And so as you can see from, what happened with Justin Bieber recently, where his face, I don't know if you've seen his face, he's got what's called Hunt-Ramsey syndrome, which is sort of like, what's it called? It's sort of like
Bell's palsy.
Bell's palsy, which is a paralysis of the face, and that's brought about by shingles. Hunt-Ramsey syndrome is brought about by shingles, and it attacks the same group of nerves, the trigeminal nerves that come on your face, In my case, it attacked my eye. In his case, it attacked his facial muscles and his balance and his hearing. And so they're both really very dangerous because it can actually infect your brain when it attacks your head. And so it can kill you. But in some cases, it can make you go blind. And in his case, he's got this facial paralysis that may never completely heal.
He's so young.
It's a pretty terrible thing. So if you're old enough to get the Shingrix vaccine, I fully advocate
I have it.
I've now had it, but I still had a flare up recently of shingles.
So it once you have it, even if you get the vaccine, you're still a little.
You could, if you've already had it, especially. So, but I'm glad to have gotten it, because it does help and it does reduce the.
And was it in the same area?
Yeah.
Yeah, it always recurs in the same place.
Usually does, right? So
It's the same nerve. The same nerve is affected. Mhm.
So I just have to deal with that and make sure I'm calm. I'm pretty calm anyway, but just not get too stressed and things like
So
that.
be more like Elizabeth and I, more of a slacker.
Yeah, just be
Yeah, it was
lazy.
just a lot of things. I had some parental
Yeah.
issues. I was having to work out with my mother and some other things that were happening, with the family, and there was just a lot happening. And we'd had some friends die recently, Willem Pugmire, and some other stress with friends related to a job thing, and so it would all just mounted up. But I got through it, and we got through everything, and we got through Bill's whole thing, and now we're on the kind of the upswing again, which I'm happy about because it impacted my productivity like a lot. So.
And you have amazing productivity. You always have.
Oh, I've had it. I've got to dig out now. So we're in the process of digging out. We're about like 85% where we want to be.
That's great.
I figure by the end of the year, we'll be about 100%. We can go into the new.
Great.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you guys are amazing.
More anthologies because I want to be in them.
Yeah.
I'm planning on it. I want to do a future weird too. I've already got some ideas for stories because that's a half reprint, half original, unlike my other ones. Devil's Coattails, Bleeding Edge, and Dark Fantastic were all original. And these, like Future Weird, is half and half. It's like half original, half reprint, like a rare reprint. And then the next one I want to do is half rare reprint and half original. So, but that won't be. And then there's another one I would like to do about music that in the weird that will be the same format.
Cool.
So.
Thank you so much for telling us
you guys
all
are
about
amazing.
this. This is wonderful stuff.
Right.
I mean, it's so, and also it's really like, I can't think of the word, inspiring.
I mean, yeah. Well, Elizabeth, it's either inspiring or I need to go take a nap. I'm not sure which right.
Yeah. I feel like Rod Serling. He says if I drop a pencil, I'm 2 weeks behind. I mean, I feel like that. Sometimes, and it's like so we got the movie we're finishing. I've got at least 2 or 3 anthologies in mind that I'm trying to plan for. I'm writing short stories. I'm writing a lot of nonfiction. I have 3 nonfiction books I'd like to do. I'm writing a lot of nonfiction for ST and for Jared at Centipede. And I'm writing, I don't know, we're going to be doing our music again. And there's some art stuff I want to get done. And then we're dealing with Bill Nolan's estate. So we have to manage that. So there's offers and things coming in for that we want to do because some of that goes to charity and,
well, we will keep our eyes open for all of your stuff.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting, especially once the rights reversion happens. I think it will be very exciting for Logan.
Good.
But either way, there's going to be Logan books coming out, at least 4 that I can think of.
Wow.
So, mine and the ones with Alan Dean Foster, I'd like to get those out. So, because they were big treatments, about 30-page treatments each. So they'd have to be punched up. He and I discussed that in an email and revised because they were done in the 80s. And so we want to modernize those a little bit. And then I don't know if it'll be he and I collaborating and finishing them up or if I'll do that by myself, with the things he and Bill have already done. So that's kind of how I'm envisioning it getting completed.
And are you planning on publishing those yourself or?
No, I have an agent for the Logan related material. It's a company called Tried Up Media Group, which is, and the agent is named Mark Gottlieb, and the agent, the lawyer getting the rights back is totally unrelated to that. He's an entertainment and copyright attorney out of LA. But Mark Gottlieb, and then I have an entertainment attorney myself, other projects that I use for assistance with some of this stuff, named Mark Litwack. So there's 3 Marks. And then
So
I know
many
Mark
Marks.
Dupree, and I know Mark Bill Gray. And it's like Planet of the Marks, you know.
I know.
There was one Logan book that Bill did co-write with an author, and I'm not going to mention the name of it, but it was unfortunately, although I personally we never got along for whatever reason, and I'm not sure why, but this writer and Bill had a big fight several years before Bill passed away, and so even though the book was completed, Bill doesn't want it published.
Yeah.
And so it's just stuck. And since the writer, I felt, was rude to me, I feel no obligation to help him get his thing done. And so it's pretty much dead in the water, and it's never going to see the light of day. But, you know, that's unfortunate because that would be another Logan project. But it was he and Bill, they fell out. He kind of bullied Bill and was trying to like force him to do some things. So they didn't live in the same area, luckily. But so Bill wanted no contact with him and all this sort of thing. And so that book's never going to come out because it was announced at one time, and now it's never going to come out from what I can tell.
Well, you don't need another book to bring out.
No. Especially one with bad vibes. I don't want any bad vibes.
Yeah.
And I don't wish any ill will toward this writer. You know,
Yeah.
I want him to be fine. You know, it's not that, and it's not me holding up. It's just this was Bill's wish, and so I'm honoring Bill's.
Yeah.
If Bill had said go ahead and work with him to publish it, I would have. You know, but even though he and I don't get along, you know, there's always just emails. But he decided that he didn't want that, so I said okay.
And then Bill was working on stuff even up to just a month or so before he passed away. He was working on a crime novel.
Yeah.
And the manuscript is finished, and he was in the process of editing it. I was helping him type it up and edit. So we can finish that up as well. That's an interesting project.
Cool. Yeah, you certainly have your plates.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, full.
so
Thank you for spending so much time with us, talking about all this stuff.
yeah, it's
Well,
been
hopefully it's
really
interesting to
wonderful.
people.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
hope it's interesting.
Well,
Oh,
it's interesting
yeah,
to us,
it's
so,
fascinating.
yeah.
There's so much there.
We'll
Okay.
have to have you come back when you have a project that's ready to go.
Yeah.
And
We'll probably have
we'd love
several
to-
at once that are ready.
Okay,
Going.
all right.
Great. So we look forward to talking to you in the future. And now it's the best thing we learned this week. Okay, mine's going to be simple this time, which is that Patagonia is now devoting 75% of all its profits to climate change.
Yeah,
Not making the climate change, but to stopping climate change.
they are awesome. I saw that. That's amazing. I wish I'd written that one down, but I didn't. So mine is people have found new scorpions in
Okay.
California. New
California?
scorpions. They've been around, but they just recognized that it was a subspecies. I mean, they started recognizing it years ago, but it finally has passed through. And it was high school students who figured it out originally.
Wow. New pets for you guys.
Yeah, new pets. No, they're not reptiles.
No. Not reptiles.
Not reptiles. You'd have to
No.
branch out.
Just
I've
cool.
had tarantulas.
Yeah. They're okay.
I like tarantulas. They're delicate though.
Tarantulas got me over being as afraid of spiders, that's for sure. Because they
Yeah,
have little person.
That's
Yeah,
good.
they're pretty cool. They're
Yeah.
pretty cool.
They're pretty
So-
sweet.
How about you guys? Anything else to quirky, fun, weird for the week?
What about you, Sunny? What's weird? What did you find interesting
Well,
about last week?
So you had shown me this video from Reddit where a beetle was attacked by a fungus, and the fungus had eaten the beetle completely, except the beetle was still alive and crawling like a zombie beetle, and the fungus was controlling it now. And then we were watching the Dahmer show, and he talks about, this is horrible. His father tells him a story in the show about how they used acid to destroy someone's, I think it was an animal's brain. But once they got to a certain point of destruction, it acted like it was still alive. And I thought, wow, there's a parallel. I wonder what this is about. So that was what I learned this week. That was very disturbing.
And you're thinking next weird fiction I write is
Right.
think
Right.
about that.
I already did use that as a premise, actually, in some weird fiction. It was a book I did, well, a novel called Milton's Children, and there's an aspect of that where they talk about T. Gundy, which is toxoplasmosis, is what that is more commonly referred to as, and that's a parasite that infects animals that makes them like inclined to take risks. So suicidal kind of risks sometimes, like the rat that is infected with it will go out into the open and then be found by a cat. And then the cat will do whatever it does with the rat and become infected. And that makes the cat more likely to do that. And they've discovered that can actually happen in people too.
Yeah, because I think cat species can pass that on.
It can.
It's a zoonotic, kind of transmission.
That's why you should just you shouldn't put your cat poop down the toilet,
No.
because apparently otters can get toxoplasmosis from it. I read that at one point. So
Wow, I
Probably any
never
mammal.
know that.
There's
Any
a
mammal
cool
can get it.
one.
What is
That's
toxic?
cool
I've heard of
fact.
that though, and I've heard people can get it, but I don't know what it does to people. Do you?
Well,
Well,
it
it
can
does-
cause miscarriages for one
it
thing.
can cause miscarriage. The biggest thing is for women getting it when they're pregnant, right?
And women are not supposed to handle cat poop when
Right.
they're pregnant, especially because it can do that. But it can also, they think now there's a cohort of people that's not known that they think some of them, their suicidal behavior or risky behavior is related to T. Gondii infestation.
Huh.
Yeah, I think I saw something recently, not about that, but about what a large percentage of people actually have it.
Mm-hmm.
That it's a lot
That's true.
larger than they thought.
Sure,
So
Yeah, that
Is
came
that
out
your-
that came out a few years ago. Yeah, and
Okay.
I had already written my novelette by then, because I thought it was fascinating that they would become like zombified by this thing, which is what happens, in the case of the rats or the mice or whatever. And so that's kind of creepy and weird. And I was like, wow, that's a great part of this story. Maybe something like that has happened that the U.S. government has been part of, kind of like MK Ultra or something, and try to control people by infecting them with these parasites. And so I had that as a sub-thread in that thing, and that was years ago. So, and then, a year before the pandemic hit, or a year and a half before the pandemic hit, I wrote a big, long story in my second collection called Epistles from Dis. That was the name of the story, and it was about a massive pandemic that was unleashed intentionally by a scientist.
Huh.
And like it wiped out the entirety of humanity. So, and it was just basically, I structured it interestingly. It was before, when the researcher was developing it and was slowly going mad because he had infected himself with it to test it, because no one would allow him to work with infesting other people with it. And so he started going insane and he unleashed it. And then the second part of the story is like well after society had collapsed. So I didn't bother with the middle where it's all going to pieces. So it's basically before and after. That's how it's divided. And so afterward, it's just total mayhem and chaos. It's like Mad Max. And, pretty interesting stuff, though, because they were using like cruise ships to house people who were ill. And I was like, that's weird, because they brought the Mercy, the cruise, not the cruise ship, but the Mercy ship from the Red Cross in, to handle some of the overflow during New York's thing. And so I'm like, wow, this is weird, these weird parallels. But I'd already written the story, so I kind of don't want to deal with pandemic stories anymore.
yeah, yeah.
Kind of got that out of my system.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody really wants pandemic stories.
Wow.
Like, no more
No.
pandemics. So thank you so much for talking to us about so many things, and we could go on forever, which I would love to do, but maybe we shouldn't. But so thank you so much. And also I want to thank Maria Korloff for being our manager, editor, Alex Korloff for helping us. We couldn't do this without you guys.
We absolutely couldn't. And please like the video and leave comments below if you liked it. And be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification button so you won't miss any episodes. And if you want to support our publication and help us publish more original content, please support us on our Patreon page. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thanks
guys.
everybody for having us. We appreciate it. Yeah, it was a fun,
That was fun.
it's a fun show. I'd like to, if you'll have us back, when we got something, we'll let you know.
Definitely.
That's
everyone.
great.
So,
Yeah, we'd have to
thank you.
talk again. So much fun.
And thank you everyone for popping by to give us a watch. So,
Thanks.
hi everyone.